I'm calling on the Premier to urgently and immediately recall Parliament. We know that the Parliament hasn't sat since late November last year and is not due to sit until the first week in March. On average, Tasmanian Parliament only sits 45 days a year. This is compared to the Federal Parliament, which sits on average 65 days a year. Tasmania is facing a number of crises at the moment. We're dealing with a pandemic, of which there's very serious ramifications for what's been happening at the moment in terms of our health and well-being. We also know that we have a serious crisis in health and housing. And of course, there are many parents right across the state who are concerned about what's going to happen when their children go back to school next week. This government has made a habit out of avoiding accountability and avoiding scrutiny in Parliament. The people of Tasmania deserve much better. They deserve to have questions asked, and the Parliament and the government answer those questions. So I call on the Premier to urgently recall Parliament so we can work together to ensure that we're responding to the global pandemic appropriately in a Tasmanian setting, but also to hold himself to account when it comes to the health and housing crisis that this state is facing, and also answer the questions around what's happening in education at the moment. I'm very concerned that there is not a decent plan in place to deal with the shortage that there will no doubt be of relief teachers. And what happens when a school has an outbreak in particular and we have a number of teachers who need to isolate? I think it's time that Parliament is recalled and the government opens itself up to scrutiny. I've been out and about in the last few weeks in particular talking to people in the street about what they think of politicians and Parliament in the current situation. And I think it's a common thread that people view parliamentarians as lazy. And they are very concerned that there's such a long break between when Parliament sat last year in late November and when it will be recalled on the 1st of March this year. It's a very long break, particularly when we think about the number of serious issues that we have to deal with. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We've thrown open our borders and we're now trying to live with COVID-19. There are a lot of questions about that. But even putting the pandemic aside, there are questions around housing, for instance. So we've heard it once again that Hobart is one of the most unaffordable cities to live in Australia. We know that there are far too many people on the housing waiting list. We know, just as recently as yesterday, again, a call from the Nursing and Midwifery Federation, concerns about tired and exhausted nursing staff and hospital healthcare staff who need a plan, who need to be supported. So there are so many questions that this government must answer, but they have formed a habit of avoiding scrutiny and they've formed a habit of avoiding Parliament. In the health setting, we know, as I say, that there are a number of healthcare professionals who are concerned about burnout, about what the plan is when we have health professionals who have been dealing with a pandemic for now over 2 years, who are simply at breaking point, at burnout point. What happens when they are not available anymore? Those questions need to be answered. And of course, we know that there's a complete crisis in the housing situation. We have far too many people on the public housing waiting list, and we know the housing affordability is just skyrocketing at the moment and people can't afford to buy.